Hi students, and welcome to this lecture that will cover the 18th and 19th centuries. We'll get right into it. Here are some key terms that you're going to want to look out for during this lecture. Rococo, Neoclassicism, Romanticism. These are all art movements that will kind of link to one another. And then the term sublime, this is not referring to the band, of course, but rather a ancient philosophy, an idea that the Romanticists, the Romantic artists really enjoyed, which had much to do with kind of the awe-inspiring notions of nature and kind of how large the world is. But we'll get to all that in due time. We have to start this lecture with this fellow. So if we're working from the early 1700s, we have to realize this is a time of imperialism, absolutism, and the divine monarchy in France. So absolutism basically means that the king, as you see here, Louis XIV, had absolute power. So basically there were no rules for him. He could do whatever he wanted. There's no constitution he has to follow or anything like that. Divine monarchy basically means he's a monarch, mono meaning one, right? He's the single ruler. Divine means that he believes, and his followers believe, that he was ordained to be the monarch by God. So it is through the divinity of God that he became monarch. Okay, so you can see the issues with this. And this will, of course, ideas like this will be very much questioned by the time we get to the French Revolution. This will lead to the French Revolution. During his reign, Louis XIV declared himself the Sun King, of course, linking himself to ancient Greek and Roman gods and goddesses. Apollo, an ancient Roman god, this was a god of the sun, right? This is the Sun King as well. So making that lineage, he obviously feels like he's pretty incredible, as you can see here with his official portrait. Here you can see a variety of symbols that tell us about his wealth and his power. For one thing, we've got this silk fabric, this red silk fabric at the top. Obviously this is just symbolic. There's no reason that one would have to have a giant thick silk curtain in their room like this. This is just to show off the wealth of the king. Of course, it's embroidered with gold around the edges, gold also being tied to wealth. You can see his furs and the other fabrics here. He's got a chair, a kind of throne behind him. The use of the color blue and red, right? This makes us think about the use of purple. We know these colors are close to purple. Indeed, they make purple if you mix them. And we know purple is tied to was reserved for the emperors and people who had lots of money. And of course, we see Christ in robes of purple in Byzantine art as well at an earlier time. Of course, showing that purple was not only a difficult dye to make, so it's hard to get fabrics that were purple, but also tying that to wealth and power. We also have fur here, so this amazing kind of blanket that he is holding, that he's wrapping around himself. This is made out of animal fur, and it looks like on the outside there's silk that has been embroidered with gold. Fleur-de-lis, a symbol of France, of course. So if any one of you in here has ever held animal fur, it's incredibly dense, and because of that, it's very heavy. So not hundreds, but probably dozens of animals had to be slaughtered to create such a large blanket. The kind of fur that you see here is actually from a small animal. So many animals had to be killed to make this really thick, really heavy blanket, kind of shawl thing that he's got. Historians have talked about this as being a little bit ridiculous. If he actually was holding that piece of kind of fur like this, it would have been incredibly heavy. Probably would have been over 100 pounds, right? So he wouldn't even really have been able to walk comfortably with this. Again, simply symbolic here, showing off his wealth and his power. Behind him, we have the column. Columns are often symbols tied to wealth and power as well. Here you see it actually as tied to classical Greek and Roman mythology. Those civilizations, ancient Greece and Rome, those were some of the sought after ancient civilizations that were seen as incredibly powerful. So the king wants to kind of link himself to those powerful worlds with the use of the column. And of course, when you think about Greek and Roman mythology and you think about Greek and Roman ruins, what still exists? Well, when you think about those things, and if you go to those places, a lot of stuff has deteriorated, but columns still do exist. Columns still do stand. They're seen as a symbol of permanence. They're not breakable, right? Of course, some of them do crumble, but typically a reference to the unbreakability of his reign, power, of course, and the fact that they hold things up, right? They're supportive architectural elements. So that's why you have the column there as well. The sword as a symbol of his military power, a scepter in his other hand, which leads our eye very nicely down to the crown. So in case this image of the king, it wasn't enough, his crown is there just in case as well to remind us that he's the king. And then most fun, I suppose, the wig, this giant fluffy hair that he's got on his head that gives him about 4 inches of height probably. His legs, how can you not look at these legs and just be envious? These are beautiful legs. And then these shoes themselves. So these are custom made high heels for the king. Another thing about the king is he was actually a shorter man. He was shorter than average. So he probably would be as tall as, or maybe a little bit shorter than many of us. Yet in this portrait, he looks incredibly large, imposing, big, right? And the things that help him are he's up on a step here. He's also got these little high heels that give him height, and then his hair, of course, makes him taller as well. But if you look to his face, and if you think about these legs, right, these look like the legs of a youthful man, a muscular man. The king was actually 63 years old in this portrait, and he was not in wonderful health. He had a lot of issues with his teeth, with his jaw, with cavities, and these were common issues for people, wealthy people at this time, because they didn't brush their teeth. They ate a lot of sweets, right, decadent pleasures. So if you look closely, if we zoom in a little bit, you can see really the only place that we see realism here is in his face. He's shown as a little bit older, more like his age. You see he's got a double chin, some obvious wrinkles, but other than that, he looks quite youthful. Now that gets us to these legs. Where do these youthful legs come from? Really, he's obscuring most of his body with his clothes and then this huge piece of drapery fur that he's got, but he's really showing off his legs. So why might that be? Well, actually, the king was a huge supporter of the ballet, and he himself was a ballerina as a child. So he's really drawn to the ballet. He supports the ballet, he funds the ballet, and so he was showing that off in his support for the ballet with his depiction and the emphasis here in this official portrait on his kind of beautiful legs. He's even in a ballet stance, right? I don't know ballet very well, but I know this is one of the particular stances. So that's what you have going on with those legs. All of this gets us to think about an important conflict that artists are having at this time. Many of them are conflicted between depicting historical accuracy or depicting idealism. So what does the king actually look like versus how does he want to look to be a symbol of power? So obviously with a lot of these regal portraits, you have an emphasis on idealism, these really beautiful, amazing legs. Were his legs really like that? Well, not really, probably not likely, but nonetheless, they've been idealized to make him look youthful, powerful, even though he was an aging king and not in really great health at this point in his life. Let's move on. Within this period, it's also important to talk about modes of display. So how would artworks have been shown? Well, at this point, you have the French Academy coming up with what we call salons. It's a French term. It looks like a hair salon, right? But it's actually the N is silent. Or it's very soft. So this is called a salon. These were gatherings held by the aristocracy, hosted by the aristocracy, the higher classes, and this is a place where they could really revel in their own social status. This is what these places would have looked like. A lot of people having a good time, and notice how the art is displayed. You have it crammed together, smaller paintings near the ground, and then as the paintings are kind of stacked upon one another, you see the larger paintings near the top. And this is very specific. Here's another picture of 18th century display salons. A salon was a place where there would have been music mixed with observing art. These were spaces of interaction. There would have been noise, movement, conversation, debate, right? Debating with other people of the aristocracy about the symbolism in a painting, just to show off how much you know about art, right? Trying to show off how cultured you were. This was an activity, though, exclusively for the aristocracy. So you and I could not have necessarily gone to the salon to look at artworks, but this would have been reserved for the higher classes. Now, this is very different than what we think of today as a gallery setting. If we were in class together, I would ask you to think about, well, what are galleries like today? And you probably would have said white space, white walls. Paintings are moved away from each other, so there's lots of space in between them. Shiny, cold floors, really uncomfortable benches, fluorescent lighting sometimes, right? That's very different than what we have emerging with the salons of the 18th century in France. You have couches, you have rugs, you have dim lighting, and you have a lot of people talking, right? Conversing, debating. Today, when we go into a space like this, we're told we probably should be quiet, we can't have food and drink, we can't get too close to the artworks because an alarm might go off. Artworks are given lots of space in between them, right? They're seen as anonymous, they exist by themselves. So very different space than what we have today. And here is just a drawing of a salon from this period. And we're actually going to, so you can note the key differences. We're actually going to look at the painting that you see here that I'm circling. This is the Oath of the Horatii. And you'll notice there's a hierarchy to the way that paintings were displayed in these salons. The smaller paintings that were basically dedicated to still lifes, genre paintings, and portraiture were near the bottom. And then as you go up, you see the larger paintings, more important subject matter, and then at the very top you have history paintings, usually really large depictions of historical events. It's also important to talk about the Age of Enlightenment when we talk about the 18th century in Europe. So you've probably heard of some of these Enlightenment philosophers: Rousseau, Diderot, Voltaire. These philosophers brought up a lot of new ideas at the time. The Enlightenment means that something has been shed light on, right? And really what the Enlightenment means is, you know, the period prior to this, of course, we talked about the Renaissance last time. Early Enlightenment kind of ideas came up with the use of humanist thinking during the Renaissance period. But this period, you have even more of an enlightenment where people are really starting to think about religion and the things that they had found that they thought were true, the kind of truth that the church was giving out, right? The way that the church approached science and the study of, for instance, astronomy, right? The church actually taught that everything centered around the earth in a circle because the circle is the most perfect form. Well, at this point, scientists find out, you know, this is not true, right? Everything orbits around the sun, and those orbits are not circles. These are ellipses. So there's an intellectual destabilization of the church at this time, but there's also a move away because of the church becoming so corrupt. So we have the Roman Catholic Church starting to sell indulgences. So basically you can buy an indulgence if you're a sinner, and then that will give you a pass into heaven. This was happening at this time as well. And this also leads to the Protestant Reformation, which we're not going to get into today. But all of this and the Age of the Enlightenment caused people to start moving away from the church, where you have ideas centered on reason as a primary source of authority and legitimacy, not divine will, not God's will, not superstitions as tied to the church. We also have an important key text by Rousseau, one of these philosophers, called The Social Contract, that comes out at this time as well. He wrote that the king does not, in fact, receive power from God, like a divine monarch, right? So you can tell Louis XIV was probably shaking in his boots, but rather the power should come from the general will of the people. So a move towards kind of a democratic society, and we'll see after the monarchy is displaced, we have a republic that takes its place. So moves toward democratic thinking. As far as the art world does follow. So we'll look at a style called Rococo at the beginning of class today, at the beginning of the Enlightenment, where you're not really seeing these ideas permeating the art world until the Neoclassical movement. But once we have Neoclassicism, we have a move towards representing reason within paintings. So order, harmony, and moral perfection are emphasized. This, of course, leads to the French Revolution. The Enlightenment ideals question the monarchy, and of course, that's going to lead to it falling apart for the monarchs. So let's talk about the first movement that I wanted to touch on today, though, the Rococo. The Rococo, as a term, is derived from small decorative stones and shells, and you can see it's influenced the space here at Versailles. This is a palace that was about half an hour out of Paris. You have to take the train to get there. At one point, when the regent Louis the 15th moved his court to Versailles and then of course back to Paris, but there's this amazing palace there where the king lived for a little while. It's incredibly decadent, as you can see here, too decadent, too overindulgent, too many chandeliers, too many mirrors. This is called the Room of Mirrors. Too much gold framing the walls, floral designs, right? And these are the type of things that the Rococo movement really did value. So the Rococo also saw a shift away from the monarchy, where paintings weren't so focused on the monarchy, even though here you have an image of Marie Antoinette by an important female artist at the time, Elizabeth Vigée-Lebrun, an important key artist in the history of art. But you have a move away from just representing monarchs, even though you still have that happening, but you have more of an interest with the Rococo style in actually depicting the aristocracy and the things that they cared about at this time. This is a reaction against the intensity, drama, and dark lighting of the Rococo, of the Baroque movement, which was very strict. And if you'll recall, we looked at this in the last lecture. Here's a comparison for you. We have Caravaggio, a Baroque artist in Italy, with that David with the head of Goliath. Again, Baroque, incredibly intense subject matter, dramatic theatricality. These are things that are important to the Baroque artists. Dramatic lighting, but also dramatic subject matter. This is the exact moment when David has cut off Goliath's head. Blood still spills from the open wound, right? So this is pretty intense. Versus Rococo, which you see over here on the right side, basically the opposite, right? So you actually have pastels, light colors, light, airy subject matter, fun. And of course, I always like to talk about the F words that come up when we talk about the Rococo. When I was an undergrad and I first heard about the Rococo, my professor said, okay guys, think about all the F words that come to mind for you. What are the F words? And we're all like, what? What are you talking about? And he said, fun, floral, fanciful, frivolous, right? All these things. And of course we're like, oh, okay. And then he said, and the other F word that you're thinking of is also implied in the art of the Rococo, because it is the lifestyles of the rich and famous, the lifestyles of the aristocracy, and the things that they valued. And this also meant eroticism and sexuality, right? So let's look at this one painting. This is The Swing by Fragonard. It is a Rococo painting, and what you have here is the artist being commissioned by a man in the aristocracy who was having an affair. So you see two men depicted here. This is supposed to be the husband of the woman who's on the swing. She is the focal point. The artist has used complementary colors, right? Pinks and light greens, those are complements, to emphasize the female figure at the center who's swinging. Her husband, he seems oblivious. He's got a smile on his face as he swings her this way. Well, she's looking down at the bushes, right? She knows someone else is here for her. You can follow her across the painting as she swings. You see her, she kicks her shoe off into the bushes. It flies this way. So we follow the shoe over to the Cupid figure who we have here, who brings its hand to its mouth. So of course, Cupid within mythology is the god tied to love, eroticism, and he says quiet, right? This is a secret affair. And then our eye can draw down to the figure in the bushes who's hidden from the man up here, but of course the woman in the swing and him connect eyes. You can see implied line there between them, but really when you look to his face and you look where his eyes are looking, where is he looking? We have implied line, goes right under her skirt. And she knows it and she's excited about it, right? She likes it. So she kicks her shoe to open her skirt a little bit and give him a view. So ever so scandalous, right, at the time. We see this kind of thing coming up a lot in the Rococo style, the kind of lifestyles of the rich and famous, the aristocracy, who really didn't have much to do all day but swing in their private gardens, in their fancy dresses, right, and think about kind of erotic endeavors that they had. So this painting, you see that happening here. But overall, there's also kind of a warning here. While you see this little dog here, a symbol of fidelity, he seems unhappy, he's disheveled, he's barking, right? He knows something is happening. So perhaps a warning sign there as well. And of course, overall, you have a garden, which is supposed to be a manicured space, right? It's us controlling nature, but this garden is very overgrown. The fountain doesn't work anymore. There's a rake that's been tossed aside here. So clearly it's not been kept up. And this is just a symbol of kind of our nature, our human nature, right? Just like we can't control nature in the wild, the idea is we can't control our human nature and our desires for one another, as you see here. Have you seen this painting before? Maybe if you've seen Frozen, and I have 2 children, so yes, I've seen it thousands of times. Anna has this painting in her parents' study, and when she's excited during the opening song, one of the opening songs, where they're about to open the gates and she's going to be free, she's going to be fun and frivolous, right? She swings in front of the swing, and for a moment she takes place of this woman. Whether or not Disney did their research here, I'm not sure. If they know that they're actually bringing up a painting about an affair, but they must have known, right? The other thing to note about this painting is it is rather small. It's actually, this painting was, because it was about a secret affair, the guy who commissioned it didn't want it to be super big. So it's actually pretty small. This is a painting that he could have hidden away in a cabinet. This would have been very scandalous, so it's unlikely that the person who painted or who commissioned this would have really wanted people to see it. He would have viewed it in private. And a lot of these paintings were made at this time because they were so scandalous, right? They weren't virtuous. They were the opposite. They were self-indulgent. So you would have had small places to hide these so that when your friends came over, you could put them away. And then when your friends left, you could view them privately because they were small enough to do so. A couple details for your pleasure. No pun intended. Okay, so then the next thing that I have to bring up here is another piece that is a pilgrimage on the island of Cythera. We're not going to look at this one specifically. It is a Rococo, but you can find information about it in the video that I'm going to post next to this lecture. So now let's move on to Neoclassicism. We have to think about a key writer at the time, a philosopher, Diderot. He was not only a philosopher, but also an art critic. He wrote about art that the aim of art should be to make virtue attractive in art and make vice odious, right? Make virtue look wonderful, something to aspire to, and then make vice look horrible. And this is the aim of every honest man who takes up the pen, brush, or chisel. So this is also at a time when Pompeii is being unearthed. So Herculaneum and Pompeii, these ancient Roman cities that were covered in volcanic ash during ancient times. These were found in the 1700s and unearthed, sparking more of an interest in the classical world. So the next style that we're going to talk about is called neoclassical. Neo, replacing the self-indulgence of the Rococo style with a new interest in the classical world and classical values. So the first thing we're going to look at is a neoclassical painting, which draws from the classical world and classic mythology by Angelica Hoffman. Here you have an actual story of the Roman world where you have a nymph. So it's a myth. You have a water nymph who comes and advises, and of course these look like ancient Roman people as well, advises Numa, who of course is one of the founders of Rome. You see him here. But while she advises him, he's about to establish the rules for the Roman city. And she says, okay, you have a lot of power, but remember the heavens, right? She points up towards the heavens to make sure he's being virtuous in his decisions to make these rules. Very neoclassical. Here's another work that's become iconic within the neoclassical movement. It's by Jacques-Louis David. David is kind of the poster boy for neoclassicism. This is called The Oath of the Horatii from 1784. It too is based on a Roman story. You also have linear perspective. You have Roman architecture. You know, you have those the Roman arches and the columns, right? But also a Roman story. So the story goes, there was a time in Roman history when Rome was going to be fighting another city next door called Alba. Instead of sending both armies, the Romans decided to send three brothers, and the Albans sent three brothers to fight. These are the three brothers sent by Rome. They're the Horatii brothers, and they make an oath to their father to die for their city, right? Seen as completely noble, very virtuous here, not emotional whatsoever, versus what we should not do, right? You have the women at the side who don't look like Roman gods and goddesses. They look disheveled, they're curved in line versus these kind of like rectilinear straight lines of the men. You see them curved. They're so emotional they can't even look up. They cover their eyes. And of course, part of the story too is that there was intermarriage between the Horatii brothers and the Koratii brothers, who would have been the other three brothers who would have had to fight against the Horatii. And one of the women here is married to a Horatii, and the other woman here is set to be married to a Koratii. So neither side wins, and these women are incredibly engulfed in their emotions. Of course, during the Enlightenment, all of this is to say that this is virtuous, the men who are going to die for their city, and the women who don't understand their role and their civic duty to the city, they're not virtuous. Instead, they have emotion, these horrible things we call emotions. And of course, they're right next to children. And so that suggestion of their being childish because they can't control their emotions. And this would have been a perfect neoclassical subject matter for neoclassical style, as you see here. Another piece we're going to look at in the neoclassical movement, also by Jacques-Louis David. This piece is actually has to do with the French Revolution. David was a Jacobin. This was a very active and very violent group during the French Revolution. He was friends with Marat. Marat is depicted here. He was killed. He was a French political theorist, physician, and scientist. He was a radical journalist, though. That's what he was known for. And because then he had a lot of enemies. So David and Marat were dear friends in the revolution. Well, Marat was killed, of course. He was murdered because of what he was doing as his writings. So a woman named Charlotte Corday made this kind of devised a trick to get into his room. He's bathing here. He had a rare skin disease, which made it so that he had to sit in the bath to be comfortable all day. And so here he's working from the bathtub. So she comes in, tricks him into thinking she's an ally. She's got a list of enemies, and he says, "Yes, thank you for this list. We will have all these people beheaded by the guillotine by the end of the week," right? So he's not like necessarily a perfect person. This is why he had a lot of enemies. And of course, the French Revolution at this point and the Jacobins within that frame were extremely violent. So after he says that, she of course takes out her knife that she's been hiding and stabs him in the chest. You see him dying here. His dear friend, David, paints this as a memorial. If you look closely, there's a note in his hand as well. And David has painted that, Corday, the woman who kills him, she was so unhappy with her life that she's decided to take his life, right? The other thing I want you to note about this is if you look closely and you look at his limp arm and his limp head, it looks a lot like images of Christ in the deposition when he's being taken off the cross. And this is very specific. It's maybe not very obvious to us because we're not bombarded with images of Christ today. But at this time in history, people would have seen this and instantly made the connection between Marat and the dead Christ. And specifically, we know that David was influenced by this painting, or this sculpture, the Pietà by Michelangelo. He was obsessed with classical works like this. He loved this piece. And here you see the dead Marat with his arm falling out of the side like that, just like Christ, and the head to the side as well. So people would have seen this association right now really quickly, and quickly made associations between Christ as the martyr, as the ultimate martyr, and then with Marat as the martyr who died for the revolution. And people were not happy about this, I will say that. The other thing to note with neoclassicism is this is after the French Revolution, and during the revolution we see Napoleon beginning to take hold as the monarchs are being pushed out. I'm not going to focus a lot on him, but when he takes power, he basically orders the invasion of a lot of different countries, and with that, he tells his soldiers to bring back a bunch of good art. So the Louvre is an important art museum in France today, one of the biggest collections in the world of art, and a lot of the art there was actually brought back during this period, brought back by his soldiers as loot of war. So take all the good art and bring it back to France, and now a lot of it is still there. But because of this, the classical sculpture also informed the architecture of the time. So these two specific buildings, for instance, and there's so many more, are done in the neoclassical style. And this was to legitimize the empire, to draw it connections between the French Empire of the 1700s and 1800s to classical Greek and Roman civilizations. So this looks like a Greek temple, right? This looks like Roman arches, right? No, these are actually French modern architecture of the 1700s and 1800s using neoclassicism. The last thing we're going to get to today, we won't focus too much on it, is Romanticism. I will be posting a video about a few of these pieces as well, so make sure you check those out. Romanticism was a move away from emotion, right? A move away from individualism, and instead an interest in the awe of nature. This was in a reaction to the Industrial Revolution, the aristocratic social and political norms of the Age of Enlightenment, this idea that we could rationalize nature. And these artists are saying, no, not everything can be measured. The Age of Enlightenment wanted to measure everything. Here we have artists who are saying nature is the one thing we cannot control. It's too powerful, it's too unpredictable, it has potential for cataclysmic extremes. And actually we should be somewhat terrified of this, right? And that we exist as tiny little nothings in such a broad space. So this gets us to the idea of the sublime. It's a philosophical term, not, of course, not the band, but this suggests the greatness beyond all possibility, calculation, or measurement. So we've got a couple artists here, Frederick, as you see here, who is thinking about this expanse where this anonymized man who's just his back to us, stands and looks out over this vast emptiness, thinks about his smallness within the scope of this. So we have the feeling of awe, right? The sublime, things that escape the ability of the mind to comprehend, things that exceed reason. So at the end of this Enlightenment period, moving away from reason, saying we realize our insignificance in the face of the infinite, in the face of the universe. And this should inspire a kind of terrifying force of nature for us. And that's what you see in these paintings as well. Here you have another work by Turner from the early 1800s. You've got this massive waterfall, one of the largest waterfalls in the world depicted here. And then this tiny woman with a dog at the base, you really minuscule people in these paintings. And so that's all we're going to do with that today. I want you to move on, and I'm not going to talk about realism today, but after Romanticism, there's a move towards a realist movement where people are interested in modern Parisian life in their paintings, a move away from idealism. So I want you to look at this painting. There's a PowerPoint posted with this lecture that is called What Shocks in 1863. So check that out and find out why this painting is so very, seen as so very, scandalous at the time. All right, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.